A boy raised by forest spirits walked into a city he'd never seen, signed a waiver with hands that had never held gold, and demanded the one quest every adventurer in the guild had refused. What he pulled out of thin air 15 minutes later would silence a room full of veterans and start a war that had been sleeping for 20 years. The forest remembered everything. That was simply its nature. Every root, every drop of blood that ever touched the ground stayed with it forever. 20 years earlier, on a night the trees still whispered about, there had been screams, smoke, and to people running for their lives along a narrow trail. One of them carried a small bundle, a child too young to understand why the world was suddenly on fire. Then came the river bank, the current fast and cold and completely indifferent, and the bundle slipped into the water. But the forest had a mind of its own, and that night the forest was watching. A small water spirit felt life struggling in the current and gently pushed the bundle toward the roots of an old tree reaching into the river like fingers. Then came the spirit of the tree, then the spirit of the night, and finally the oldest one of them all. The forest didn't call him by name. Names weren't handed out lightly here, so they simply called him Moss. Moss looked down at the wet, crying creature by the roots, reaching its arms into the darkness for no reason except that this is what children do when they want to be held. He thought for what was, by spirit standards, an unbearably long time, maybe a full minute, and then he picked the child up. The forest had just adopted its newest resident, and the newest resident had no idea what kind of childhood he was about to have. The boy was named Kai, not because any spirit chose it, but because at around 3 years old he pointed at lightning during a storm and tried to say the word himself. Moss decided that was good enough, and the forest agreed without a single objection. Kai grew up somewhere there were no people at all, only trees, wind, water, and shifting shadows that sometimes spoke. The spirits had no fixed shape. Moss could look like an old man, a tree, or simply drifting mist depending on his mood. They didn't raise him with hugs or warm meals. They raised him with knowledge, and that knowledge went far deeper than most parents could ever give. By age 5 he already knew where to find water in the driest stretch of forest. By age 7 he could read animal tracks as if the animals themselves had written him a letter. At age 10 he killed a predator with his bare hands and a short knife, not for food, but because the creature had attacked a mother moose and her calf. Moss watched him do it and said only one word, absorb, and that single word would define the rest of Kai's life. The forest was soaked in magical energy, in the roots, in the air, in the water, in the stones themselves. An ordinary person walking through simply felt peace or fear, but Kai had been soaking in it since the day he was born. It seeped into him the way water seeps into stone, slow, quiet, and utterly unstoppable. By 15 he could sense the magical trail of a living creature from half a kilometer away. By 18 he could raise a small protective barrier from nothing but the energy he had gathered inside himself. By 20 he was doing things that made even the ancient spirits stop what they were doing, just to watch. Moss once turned to the water spirit and admitted the boy had taken in more than anyone had ever planned for. Is that a bad thing? The water spirit asked, and Moss simply answered that it was amazing. Kai had no mentor with a title, no academy, no illustrated books, only spirits. And each of them taught him something completely different. Moss taught him to read the world itself. Close your eyes, he would say, and tell me what is breathing near us. Kai learned the difference between wind moving a branch and something enormous simply breathing far beyond the hill. The wind spirit taught him speed, dragging him through the trees so fast that survival meant sensing obstacles before his eyes ever saw them. At 17 Kai ran through the dense forest at night without a single collision, and the wind spirit gave him his first praise in 7 years. The stone spirit taught him strength that had nothing to do with muscle, how to stand so a blow passed harmlessly into the ground instead of breaking him. It never spoke. It simply pressed down on him with crushing, wordless weight, until his bones grew denser and his body adapted to withstand what should have killed him. The water spirit taught flexibility. Water doesn't resist. It flows around and presses down everywhere at once, and Kai had to learn to move exactly like that. And Moss saved the hardest lesson for last, magic itself, though there were no spellbooks here, only raw understanding. You're not a mage, Moss told him. A mage pulls energy from outside and uses it. A vessel pulls it in and becomes it, and that is what you are. Why does that matter? Kai asked. And Moss answered quietly that if a vessel ever released everything inside him, nothing living nearby would survive. Kai looked down at his own hands and promised he would never let that happen. And Moss simply said he hoped so. On the day everything changed, the whole forest went completely silent, as if every leaf were holding its breath at once. Moss appeared beside the fire and said only 2 words, "It's time." And Kai already knew exactly what he meant. "This is my home," Kai said, and Moss agreed, but reminded him it was not the place he was needed anymore. There are people out there, Kai asked. And Moss told him they were both worse and better than anything he'd known. Will there be monsters? Kai asked, and Moss answered that there would be monsters everywhere. That was simply what Kai was built for. The farewell lasted until dawn, each spirit saying goodbye in its own strange way. The water spirit wrapped a thin thread around his wrist that froze into a thin, nearly invisible bracelet, a permanent reminder he would carry. The wind spirit slammed into his chest so hard it sent him flying, and laughed, because that was simply how the wind said farewell. The stone spirit rested one heavy hand on his shoulder for a single second, then said nothing at all. Moss only looked at him. And in that look there were 20 full years of a childhood no one else would ever understand. I'll be back, Kai promised, and Moss gently corrected him. You'll come to visit, that's different. And that's good. And with that, the forest let him go. Kai walked all day dressed in a wolfskin jacket with a hood shaped like a wolf's head, fangs jutting above his forehead like some kind of crown, 2 knives on his belt, a short sword across his back, a bow, a quiver, and a small leather pouch that held far more space than it had any right to. For the first time in his life he heard sounds the forest never made, cartwheels, distant voices, and the sharp smell of a city instead of trees. He stood at the top of a hill and looked down at stone buildings sprawled out below, loud and enormous, and completely unlike anything he had ever known. He took a breath, and then he simply started walking down. The guard at the gate frowned hard at the wolf hood on his head, asking if that thing on his skull was actually a wolf. It's made of one, Kai answered plainly, and the guard just waved him through with a warning not to scare the horses. The first half hour inside the city was overwhelming, not from fear, simply from sheer volume. People shouting, animals snorting, smoke rising from every direction at once. People stared at him as he passed, some curious, some openly mocking his ragged furs and that unmistakable wolf hood. It didn't bother him in the slightest. He had a destination. The Adventurers Guild Moss had mentioned more than once. If you ever need a place among people, Moss had told him, start there. That's the closest thing to what you already know how to do. He found the building by its flag and the unmistakable smell of beer spilling out from the open door. Inside was a long, noisy hall lined with tables, a bulletin board, and a reception counter at the very back. Every head at the nearest table turned, then the next, then the entire room, followed almost instantly by laughter. A forest scarecrow. Someone shouted, look at that knife. Everything about him is probably made of bone. Kai stood completely calm through all of it, because compared to the roaring wind spirit, this laughter barely registered as noise. He walked straight to the counter, where a tired-looking woman in her mid-30s asked for his name without even glancing up. Kai, he answered, no last name. And she simply wrote it down without asking a single follow-up question. She asked about his hunting experience, and he listed things she clearly wasn't expecting: wyverns, shadow wolves, and something the stone spirit had once called an old malevolent root. She finally assigned him the lowest possible rank and pointed him toward the quest board, with a flat warning to start small. The laughter behind him hadn't stopped. Someone even called out asking which quest the woodsman was taking. Kai walked straight past the escort jobs and the rat extermination notices, straight toward a single sheet pinned in the corner. Red paper, black border, the word urgent stamped across the top in heavy ink. A giant troll, 3 meters tall, had already killed for seasoned adventurers, destroyed crops, and was actively attacking a nearby village. The reward was 500 gold pieces, and the notice specifically required a team of at least 5 people. Kai simply pulled it down and said he would take it alone. The entire hall fell silent for exactly 1 second, before exploding into the loudest laughter of the night. The woman behind the counter flatly informed him that as a beginner, he wasn't even allowed to accept an assignment this dangerous. Kai asked if he could take it anyway if he signed a waiver, and after studying him for a long moment, she pulled one out. Do you understand this isn't a joke? She asked, and Kai answered simply that he understood completely. Someone shouted after him as he walked out, telling him to come back and describe what a troll's insides looked like. The walk to the village took 2 hours, and Kai spent it thinking through everything the stone spirit had ever told him about creatures like this. Slow, strong, capable of healing itself, but with one small weakness hidden just beneath the left collarbone. If the old lessons still held true, the village greeted him with locked shutters and empty streets, the marks of destruction visible at its edges. An old man in a doorway confirmed the troll had already killed 3 of their own, and that the guild's men had run the moment they saw it. Kai simply asked where it usually appeared, and the old man pointed toward the northern field, warning him it would return by evening. The ground shook long before the creature appeared. Heavy footsteps Kai felt through his boots before his ears ever caught the sound. It emerged slowly from behind a hill, gray-brown skin cracked like stone, arms as thick as tree trunks, and a stench of blood and rot that reached him from far away. The little one has come to die, it rumbled, and Kai calmly corrected it. No, he had come to kill it. The first strikes came down like falling trees, and Kai simply wasn't where either of them landed. This didn't feel like a fight to him. It felt like one of Moss's lessons, patient, deliberate, waiting for the exact right opening. When the troll finally overextended both arms at once, Kai didn't retreat. He leapt straight into the blow itself, pressed against its chest where the arms couldn't reach him. He struck once beneath the left collarbone, not with a blade, but with 20 years of stored energy behind his fist. The regeneration didn't vanish, it simply broke, misfiring, sending healing energy to all the wrong places inside the creature's body. Kai drew his sword and finished it with a single precise strike to the throat. The ground shook one final time as the troll collapsed, and silence returned to the field. He spent half an hour securing proof, then opened the small pouch at his hip and stored the enormous trophy inside a space that shouldn't have fit it. The old man watched him walk back alone, alive, and slowly sank to his knees in disbelief. "We'll reward you, son," the old man offered, but Kai simply told him the payment belonged with the guild. And with that, he turned and started the long walk back toward the noisy, unbelieving city. None of them had any idea what was about to land on their guild floor. The hall was just as loud when he walked back in, someone immediately joking that the forest scarecrow must have turned tail. Before even reaching the village, Kai walked straight to the counter and simply said the mission was complete. The troll was dead. The woman's face didn't change at all. She only asked for proof, a body part, something physical. Kai turned to face the entire laughing room and raised his hand, a faint static light slipping between his fingers. Someone in the crowd stopped laughing first, sensing that something was about to happen they weren't prepared for. He brought his hand down, and the pocket dimension tore open wide, dropping an enormous cracked skull straight onto the wooden floor. It hit with a thunderous crash that rattled every mug in the building, and sent several adventurers jumping straight out of their chairs. The silence that followed was so complete you could hear water dripping somewhere from the ceiling. 100 pairs of eyes stared at the skull, then at Kai, then back at the skull again. The woman behind the counter didn't flinch. She simply opened the logbook and confirmed the mission, 500 gold, and a rank review to follow. An older adventurer with a scar across his face finally stood up and asked the only question anyone in the room actually had: who exactly was this guy? Nobody had an answer, and for the first time since he'd walked in, nobody was laughing either. Someone called after him asking his name, and Kai answered simply, just Kai, before the door clicked shut behind him. Outside, he looked up at the darkening sky and quietly asked if Moss had seen that, and the wind answered by ruffling his jacket, though there was no wind in the city that night. He woke before dawn out of pure habit, the quietest and most alive hour the forest had ever taught him to treasure. For the first time in 20 years he bought a real meal, hot soup and bread, and ate it like it was a gift from the gods themselves. The guild was quieter that morning, and the people looking at him now weren't laughing anymore. The woman, whose name turned out to be Rena, the guild master herself, told him his rank had already been temporarily raised. The review would happen after 3 more quests. That's fast, she admitted. This usually takes months, and Kai simply told her he wasn't in a hurry. Though the troll clearly disagreed. On the board he found a new notice: missing merchants, vanished caravans, and a second one marked urgent. A gorge overrun by magical predators blocking the only route to the northern mines. 3 strangers approached him at the board: a swordsman named Doors, a knife user named Nivier, and a nervous midge named Eret. "Yesterday your skull nearly knocked over a pillar," Doors said flatly. "We need a 4th for the gorge. Are you in?" Kai asked why him specifically, and Doors answered plainly, "Because you killed the 3-meter troll alone and knew exactly where to hit it." Kai agreed on the spot. No negotiation, and even split was more than fine with him. On the road, Nivier noticed he walked like someone always being hunted, quiet, controlled. Never a wasted step. "It's a habit," Kai told her. "In the forest, one extra sound could cost you your life." Eric couldn't hold back his questions. Forest spirits were supposedly higher-order beings who never interacted with humans, according to every textbook he owned. The textbooks weren't in that forest, Kai answered simply, and Eric pulled out a notebook to write that down immediately. Doors asked why he'd chosen the guild specifically, and Kai admitted Moss had simply told him to go where people fought monsters. Why leave the forest at all? Doors pressed, and Kai answered honestly that the spirits had let him go because something out here needed him. What exactly? Doors asked, and Kai admitted quietly that he didn't know yet. The gorge appeared around the bend, narrow, dim, walls rising 20 meters on either side, and a smell Kai caught from 200 meters away. "At least 20 of them," he said. "Maybe more. The scent is old, but there are fresh tracks too." Eric asked how he could possibly know that just from smell. And Kai simply answered that 20 years with spirits taught you things no book ever could. Doors laid out the plan, light from Eric, precision strikes from himself and Mivier. But Kai had a different idea entirely. I'll go first alone, he said. If they attack, I'll learn their formation, then signal you. Mivier asked flatly if he wanted to die. And Kai answered that he wanted to understand their positioning. This was his territory now, not theirs. Doors studied him for a long moment, then simply nodded and agreed to follow 10 steps behind. Inside the darkness, Kai closed his eyes and counted 23 separate points of energy scattered unevenly through the gorge. One sat higher than the rest on a rocky ledge, almost certainly the leader controlling the pack's coordination. He climbed the wall in total silence, using both sides as leverage, spiraling upward toward that single isolated point. The leader never had time to turn before Kai's fist landed precisely at the base of its skull, dropping it instantly. The pack scattered in confusion the second their leader fell, and Kai struck the rock 3 times exactly as planned. Light exploded through the gorge as Eric's dome burst open, and Doors and Mivier charged straight into the chaos. Kai leapt down into the center of the pack, and for the next 2 minutes he moved like nothing but water and wind. Every claw found empty air, every strike found only his forearm, and every counterattack of his landed exactly where it needed to. When it ended, 23 creatures lay across the gorge floor, and Kai stood in the middle of them without a single scratch. Doors finally sheathed both swords and said just one word, quietly, carrying more respect than an entire speech would have. On the walk back, Mivier asked if he ever talked about anything besides business, and Kai admitted he was simply curious how people actually worked. Doors asked where he was really from before the forest, and Kai admitted the truth plainly. His parents had died the night the river carried him away. There are archives in the city, Doors offered, records, rumors. If something happened 20 years ago, there might still be traces left. Will you help me? Kai asked, and Doors answered carefully that he couldn't promise anything, but he knew people who knew a great deal. The next day, Doors led him through the back alleys to a cramped shop that smelled of old paper, wax, and something sharper underneath. The owner, an old man named Vin, studied Kai for an uncomfortably long time before asking which forest he'd come from. The silent forest, Vin muttered. Spirits from there don't give gifts to humans. And yet there's one frozen right on your wrist. Kai explained he had been found in the river 20 years earlier, that his parents had reportedly died. Then dug through his cabinets and pulled out an old sealed document describing an attack that night, officially blamed on bandits. To clean for bandits, Vin said. 5 trained guards killed simultaneously, no witnesses, no traces. The father, Vin explained, had been a tracker working covertly for the council, investigating something tied directly to an organization called the Shadow Guild. His name was Rashir, Vin said slowly. His wife's name was Anna, and their family name was Iron. Kai repeated the name quietly to himself, testing how it felt to finally have one. Doors admitted he'd heard the name Rashir before, called the finest tracker of his generation, and that his death had never looked like an accident. Do you understand you'll start a war if you dig into this? Vin warned. And Kai answered simply that he'd spent 20 years learning to do what no one else could. Vin finally mentioned one last person still alive who had worked directly with Rashir, an old adventurer named Gorm living on the eastern outskirts, known for drinking too much and disliking visitors. The eastern outskirts were exactly as poor as expected. Narrow streets and houses that hadn't seen repair in years. Gorm didn't open the door until Kai identified himself as Rashir's son. An old man's eyes went sharp the moment he saw his face. You have his eyes, Gorm said quietly, and led him inside. Rashir found a list, Gorm explained, over 100 names. Agents of the Shadow Guild embedded in the council, the city guard, and multiple adventure guilds. He handed part of it to the council believing there were still honest people there, and was killed 3 days later. Gorm produced a small darkened metal plate Rashir had left with him for safekeeping, calling it the key to a hidden stash. Why haven't you used it yourself? Kai asked, and Gorm answered simply that it wasn't his. It was always meant for Kai. The organizer behind it all was called Null, Gorm added, still alive, still hiding somewhere in this very city. That night in the tavern, Kai lay staring at the ceiling, gripping the plate, feeling something faint pulling back from somewhere far away. The hiding place exists, he realized. Someone is still connected to it, which meant the Shadow Guild's secrets were far from buried. The next morning the plate led him block by block into an older quarter, warmer with every step, until it pulled him to a stop at a specific cobblestone. An engraved symbol matched the one on the plate exactly, carved into an old 3-story house with boarded windows and a locked door bearing the same mark. The lock opened with a single touch, no resistance at all, as if it had been waiting 20 years for exactly this moment. Inside was dust, old magic, and the unmistakable smell of paper. Lots of it, stacked neatly in a hidden basement cabinet. On top sat a single envelope bearing his birth name in handwriting he'd never seen, but somehow instantly recognized. If you're reading this, the letter began, it means I'm gone. And it means you've grown up somewhere I'll never know. Enough evidence to destroy the Shadow Guild completely sits in this closet, his father had written. That's exactly why they killed me. There's one person you can trust, the letter said, Rena, the guild master. She isn't one of them. Your mother was a brave woman. The final line read, you're probably a lot like her. Kai sat in that dark basement for a long time, not because he couldn't read the words, but because he needed time to let them settle. He carefully packed every single paper into his pocket dimension and carried them straight back to the guild. Rena's expression changed the moment he mentioned his father's name, and she quietly led him out to a private courtyard. Your eyes are exactly like his, she admitted, and confirmed that Rashir had trusted her with things he'd never told anyone else. Null isn't just the leader, she warned him. He's the one who ordered your father's death, and he spent 20 years disguised as a respected local merchant. He has people everywhere, she added, including to she suspected right inside this very guild. Kai laid out a plan, exposed the network by force, using bait no one would expect from a supposed forest savage. Rena agreed to help, on one condition, that they moved fast before the network realized what had already been found. Doors, Vivier, and Eret listened to the whole story in Kai's cramped tavern room. Father, mother, hidden papers, agents inside their own guild. This explains a death 3 months back, Doris said grimly. An adventurer who claimed he'd seen something strange, ruled an accident at the time. There are 4 of us against an organization with agents everywhere, Mivier pointed out. And Kai agreed. That was exactly why they needed to force Null into the open. A silent enemy is far more dangerous than a visible one, Kai explained. Once he's forced to move, he becomes predictable. Do you realize this is personal for you? Doris asked, and Kai admitted he did. But Moss had taught him to use anger as fuel rather than let it lead. I miss him very much, Kai said quietly, and even Doris, who had seen almost everything, nodded without a single word. Identifying the hidden agents proved harder than killing any troll, because a troll had never pretended to be a friend. Kai spent 3 days simply watching the guild's daily rhythm instead of individual people, tracking who spoke to whom, who came and went at odd hours. An adventurer named Sev kept visiting the same empty alley twice, always leaving with a lighter bag than he arrived with. Kai followed him a 3rd time, and found a small hollow in the wall holding a note, memorized instantly and left untouched. Mivier found the second lead entirely on her own, a magical tracking beacon sewn quietly into a young recruit's jacket lining. Whoever registered new recruits at the guild had to be involved too, which meant the network ran deeper than just names. Rena confirmed the suspicion the moment Kai reported it, admitting Sev had been on her list of doubts for a long time. If we take Sev out now, the higher-ups will know instantly, she warned. We have to hit them all at the exact same moment. First we need Null's exact location, Kai said. And Rena revealed he operated under the merchant name Western, running 3 warehouses and a fortified mansion in the northern district. He doesn't know me yet, Kai realized. But that advantage disappears the second Sev passes on another note. So we make him move first, Kai decided. We let him believe a simple forest outsider has found something valuable, without understanding its worth. It's dangerous, Rena warned, and Kai simply answered that it wasn't time for him to fall yet. Gorm spread the rumor personally, loudly enough for the right ears, quietly enough to look like an accident. An outsider had found old papers with names and seals. The reply came the following evening. 3 armed strangers blocking a narrow street on Kai's usual route home. The first 2 attackers barely lasted a few seconds against him, disarmed and pinned with almost no effort at all. The 3rd man studied him differently, calling him surprisingly sharp for a savage. And Kai simply answered that he was a tracker, not a savage. Something shifted in the man's face at that word, recognition instead of aggression, and he finally introduced himself as Day. Day had been Rashir's own agent for 20 years, quietly watching the city, waiting for exactly this moment to arrive. He produced a detailed map of the northern district's hidden passages, tracking every change to Null's security over the decades. 3 months ago after that adventurer's death, Null sealed one underground passage completely, Day explained. But he only blocked the entrance. The tunnel itself still runs clear underneath. Sev appeared at the doorway mid-conversation, having overheard just enough to be dangerous, and tried to flee immediately. Kai caught him instantly, pinning him against the wall without any real effort at all. You'll pass information to Null, Kai told him flatly, but only exactly what I choose to give you. The message was simple, the stash had been found. The young outsider in the wolf hood had no idea what he was actually holding. And tonight was the moment to act. The team prepared through the entire afternoon, Doors assigning positions, Mivier arranging blades within easy reach from every angle. Gorm arrived uninvited, sat in a corner with his old sword, and simply said Rashir had been a friend. No further explanation needed. Null didn't come alone, exactly as expected, sending scouts first. Then several more men through a side alley. When he finally walked in himself, he looked nothing like Kai had imagined, short, 50. Soft merchant's hands and a perfectly calm voice. "Are you alone in this room?" Null asked, and Kai answered plainly that he was, adding that it wasn't cleverness, simply honesty. "I didn't expect that," Null admitted once Kai confirmed exactly who he was. "We thought the river had taken care of everything." "Do you want revenge?" Null asked, and Kai corrected him carefully. "Revenge ends when you're dead. Justice means the truth comes out and you answer for it." Null realized far too late that he'd walked straight into a trap of his own making. Sounds of a struggle already echoing outside. 6 of his men had already been neutralized in the alley by Eret's precisely aimed light. In the darkness, "Take the papers to Rena," Kai told him. "Everything is there, names, evidence. 20 years of one man's work. This isn't the end," Null warned quietly. "The Shadow Guild is far bigger than one man." And Kai simply agreed, but called it the beginning of the end regardless. "Not everyone chooses to kill people alongside their children," Kai told him coldly. And for the first time all night, Null looked away. Later, alone on the tavern roof, Kai finally let himself feel it, the weight of a real, concrete step forward after 20 years of silence. He pressed his father's letter close against his chest and quietly said he could hear the wind. Though there was no reason for a breeze that night, Rena wasted no time gathering the whole group in a locked room behind the guild's archives. The very next morning, "These aren't just scattered agents," she said grimly. "This is a network spanning 3 cities, 3 guilds, and the council itself. 20 years ago, they eliminated a top-level tracker and disguised it as a simple robbery," she said. "And they've only grown since." A delegation from the Chamber of Commerce was arriving the very next day, including a council representative. The perfect moment to force the network into the open. "If we expose part of it now," Doors warned, "the rest will scatter and come straight for us." That evening, a distant outpost fell in complete silence, and Kai sensed something moving toward the city before anyone raised the alarm. A tall figure in a long black cloak walked calmly down the main street, guards falling one after another without a fight. "Kai Iron," the stranger said, his voice dry and nearly toneless. "You've grown up fast." His name was Walt, once part of the Shadow Guild, now something worse. Their personal hunter sent to deal with problems permanently. "I'm here to see if you're really alive," Walt said plainly, "and to decide whether you're worth keeping that way." Doors, Mivier, Eret, and even old Gorm stepped out to stand beside him, and Walt seemed almost amused by the sight of an actual group. The fight that followed moved faster than anything Kai had faced before, Walt vanishing and reappearing as though he weren't fully bound by normal movement at all. A thin black blade grazed Kai's side before Walt suddenly withdrew, satisfied, apparently, with whatever he'd come to measure. "It was a message," Rena said afterward, examining the wound. "A warning for anyone thinking of helping you." Worse news followed within hours. 2 more suspected agents inside the guild had vanished overnight, before anyone could act. "If Null knows we've breached the network," Kai said grimly, "he won't send people one by one anymore. He'll strike at the center itself." Rena refused to hide the remaining papers, instead deliberately leaking just enough through an official request to reopen the old case. The bait worked exactly as intended. Null's men attempting to burn the entire archive down during the delegation's very public visit. Half the archive was already ablaze by the time Kai reached it. Papers flying through the smoke like black ash. He dove straight into the fire, grabbing everything his pocket dimension could hold, bundles, folders, backup copies, anything he could reach. Walt stood watching from a rooftop across the courtyard, visibly stunned the moment Kai emerged from the smoke still carrying salvaged papers. Up close for the first time, Kai realized Walt wasn't fully human at all, his skin to smooth, his eyes to calm, something built rather than born. When the smoke finally cleared, Rena approached him, pale, asking exactly how much had survived. Kai stared silently at one blackened sheet in his hand, a name still legible along the scorched edge, Anna Iron. Rena froze completely, whispering that the name was supposed to have been erased from every single record. Next to it was a note, transferred to a secure facility, dated only 10 years earlier. "Is she alive?" Kai asked, and Rena admitted quietly that she honestly didn't know for certain. The world around him seemed to go silent for a moment, the forest, the river, his father's letter, and now the sudden possibility his mother might still be breathing somewhere. "It's a trap," Rena warned him plainly, and Kai agreed completely. but told her he was going regardless. "You won't go alone," she said firmly, and Kai looked around at Doors, Mivier, Eret, and Gorm, and quietly agreed. They gathered everything they had that evening: maps of the northern military zone, surviving magical traces, old rumors about forgotten tunnels. If Anna is alive, Kai reasoned, she isn't being held as a simple prisoner. She's more likely being kept as a subject, or a witness. Eret revealed that one of the archive officials had vanished right after the fire, without ever being questioned, likely gone straight to Null's side. "That means we're not dealing with just one network," Rena said grimly. "There are more layers to this than any of us realized." They left for the northern military zone at dawn, only Kai, Doors, Mivier, and Eret, keeping the group small enough to stay unnoticed. The old road was lined with rusted fortifications and crumbling stonework, remnants of a war none of them had lived through. Kai sensed no monsters, no people at all out there, only emptiness. And emptiness in an abandoned place was always the worst sign. The first gate appeared at sunset, ancient and blackened, marked with the symbol of a long-dead empire. "There's a barrier here," Eret warned, old, but still fully active, "and removing it would definitely draw attention." "Then it's necessary anyway," Kai said, and the moment the runes flared, an arrow cut through the air straight past his cheek. 3 men in gray hoods emerged from behind the hill, and one voice among them was instantly, unmistakably familiar. It was the missing archive official, smiling as he pulled back his hood, calling Kai Rashir's son with something close to relief. "Where is my mother?" Kai demanded, and the official simply smiled wider, saying he might see her before the day was even finished. Kai studied his posture rather than his words, and everything about the man's confidence screamed that this was exactly the plan all along. The fight was brief, Kai breaking the man's arm at the elbow before pinning him fully to the ground. "Why bring us here so easily?" Kai demanded, and the official simply smiled through the pain and said, "Now they know you're coming." A deep grinding sound rumbled from behind the gate as it cracked open on its own, releasing a thick, unnatural chill. Figures emerged from the darkness. Not human guards at all, but empty bodies moved by something else entirely, dead yet still walking. These weren't like ordinary enemies, Eret warned. You couldn't reason with them. You could only stop them completely. The skirmish lasted barely a minute, Kai tearing apart the magical framework hidden inside each puppet's ribcage, until they finally stopped moving. The official, still bleeding on the ground, laughed weakly, warning them that everything they cared about was already waiting down below. "You're not the first son they've been expecting down there," he added, and something cold settled hard in Kai's chest. The passage spiraled downward like a black throat, old stone laid with a precision meant to withstand fire, pressure, and magic all at once. The deeper they went, the quieter the world became, as if all life above had simply been cut off entirely. "It's not the air that's empty," Kai said quietly, "it's the absence of life itself down here." "This is what the old prisons of the Empire were built for," Eret whispered. "Places that didn't hold people but held what used to be people." The hall below opened into a massive round chamber lined with columns, a stone grate at its center, and scorched magic circles littering the floor. 2 chained figures sat in a far corner, barely recognizable after so many years locked away in that darkness. One door opened on its own, and a woman stepped out, her posture unmistakably straight despite everything she had clearly endured. Kai recognized her instantly, not from her face, but simply from the way she carried herself. "Kai," she said, almost silently, and that single word shattered 20 years of complete silence between them. "You're alive," she whispered, tears finally breaking through. "That means Moss found you after all." "I prayed it wouldn't be the people of the shadows who found you," she admitted, "though I never dared hope it would be forest spirits either." Before Kai could ask a single one of the 1,000 questions burning inside him, Eret whispered sharply that someone else was in the room. A young man stepped out from between the columns, sharp-featured, cold-eyed, wearing the same iron symbol stitched into his collar. "So it's you," the stranger said flatly, and Kai simply asked who exactly he was. Anna clenched her chains so tightly the metal groaned, whispering for Kai not to listen to whatever came next. "Who is he?" Kai demanded again, and Anna finally answered, quietly, that his name was Ryun, and that he was Kai's own brother. A heavy silence fell over the entire chamber, even Mivier forgetting to breathe for a moment. This didn't fit anywhere in Kai's world. No letter, no spirit, no memory had ever mentioned a brother. "Why didn't you tell me?" Kai asked his mother directly, and Anna admitted brokenly that she had believed Ryun was dead. "You thought I was convenient," Ryun corrected bitterly. "That's different from thinking I died." "I wasn't just kept somewhere," Ryun said coldly. "I was raised in a laboratory, inside the very system you're trying so hard to destroy." A cold dread crept through Kai as he stared at his brother's calm, unnervingly composed expression. Ryun slammed a hand against a nearby structure, a black metal capsule wrapped in old runes and heavy chains. Eric went pale the moment he examined it, calling it a chamber built for magical modification, enhancement, and alteration of a body's very structure. Were you part of this too? Kai asked quietly, and Rian answered without any hesitation. I'm their successful result. Unlike you, they needed the iron bloodline itself. Rian explained coldly, its ability to track, to find what's hidden, to sense magic no one else could. They didn't just kill your father, Rian said. They tried to raise everything they couldn't manage to steal outright. Anna finally admitted the truth she'd been hiding. That Rashir had realized the Shadow Guild wanted their children, not just their deaths. After you were born, she confessed, they decided you were too valuable to leave with us. So, I gave you to the river myself. It was the most terrifying decision of my life, she said. But it was the only choice that could ever save you. I thought about you every single day, she whispered, not knowing if you were alive. Only praying that if you were, it wasn't here. I survived, Kai finally managed, his voice breaking in the forest. And Anna smiled through her tears, telling him she could see that clearly. Rian cut through the moment coldly, calling it enough sentimentality, and struck the capsule's control panel without warning. New figures began emerging from the side walls, distorted but alive, marked with scars from repeated runic injections, eyes emptied of everything but a single command. Welcome to my army, Rian said, spreading his arms wide. And the fight erupted instantly around the entire chamber. Kai's fist finally met his brother directly, and Rian moved faster than anything human ever should. His body clearly engineered for exactly this. You're strong, Rian admitted mid-fight, and Kai answered simply that so was he, made this way. Rian corrected, not by choice. Which one of us is more human? Rian asked coldly as they collided, and Kai had no answer ready for him. A precise strike to the base of Rian's neck finally disrupted his magical channels just enough, and Kai pinned him hard to the floor. He could have ended it right there, but Anna's scream tore through the chamber first, one of the enhanced soldiers dragging her toward the open capsule. Rian burst free with sudden unnatural speed, slamming into Kai before rushing toward the capsule alongside him. Kai reached the control panel first, rewriting the ancient locking structure exactly the way Moss had once taught him. Find where it truly supports itself. The capsule cracked open, and instead of a monster, a thin, pale girl of perhaps 16 sat inside. Chains and magical conduits still wrapped around her. This isn't a target, Eric whispered, horrified. And Rian himself admitted quietly that this shouldn't even be here. The girl opened cloudy, frightened eyes and asked weakly who Kai was. And something in her gaze felt strangely, painfully familiar. Before Kai could answer, slow, deliberate applause echoed from the dark corridor behind them. Null stood in the doorway, no longer smiling politely, this time flanked by a tall, faceless figure in a gray cloak. I thought it would take you longer to uncover the truth, Null admitted calmly, clearly pleased with exactly how events had unfolded. The masked figure introduced himself in a voice as hollow as an empty well, simply calling himself the curator. You've destroyed too much already, the curator said flatly, and Kai answered without hesitation that he'd only just begun. Your mother was used as a biological key, the curator continued coldly. Your father as a tracking carrier, your brother as an enhanced vessel, and this girl as a new form of compatibility. You are all part of the same program, he said plainly. Not a tragedy, not a coincidence. A carefully designed project. 20 years ago, the council itself commissioned this project, Null revealed, meant to create people capable of sensing hidden magical structures no one else could find. Your father was the ideal tracker, Null said. You are the ideal energy carrier, and your brother, a successful adaptation. And this girl, the curator finished, is simply our control subject. Lies, Rian snapped instantly. But the curator answered calmly that Rian already knew every word of it was true. That's not all true, Anna whispered desperately, and in her hesitation, the final, painful piece of the truth became clear to everyone in the room. You signed the waiver yourself, Null said almost gently, to save at least one of your sons, didn't you? Kai turned to face his mother directly, demanding to know exactly what that meant. Anna closed her eyes, and in that silence, everything finally became painfully clear. She hadn't simply been a victim, she had been part of the mechanism too. That truth cut deeper into Kai than any blade Walt had ever drawn against him. The curator raised one hand, and reinforcements poured in from the corridor behind him, far more than the group could realistically hold back. Victory doesn't matter right now, Kai realized instantly, only getting everyone out alive. He scooped the trembling girl into his arms, far too light, clearly starved for far too long. Into the left tunnel, Anna shouted suddenly, there's an old exit near a well. I've had 20 years to memorize every inch of this place. Rian hesitated only a single second before grabbing a fallen weapon and following them. His first genuinely free choice in his entire life. The tunnel was narrow and choked with dust. Explosions and screaming echoing from somewhere far behind them the whole way out. Lyra, the girl whispered weakly when Kai finally asked her name, and he told her simply to hang on a little longer. They emerged into an abandoned lot north of the military zone. City lights glowing faintly in the far distance. Behind them, something deep underground finally exploded, sending a low tremor rolling through the ground beneath their feet. Anna sank to her knees the moment they were finally clear, and Ryan stood frozen, staring back at the chasm as though staring at the exact spot where his chains had once been. "Are we actually out?" Doors asked. And Aerith admitted honestly that he genuinely didn't know for certain. "This isn't the end," BVA said quietly, and Kai stared down into the darkness below and simply agreed. No, it wasn't. He had found his mother, discovered a brother he never knew existed, and learned his entire life had been part of someone else's long, calculated plan. Lyra looked up at him with the exact same cautious hope he must have once shown the spirits. Deep in the forest. "Will you save me?" she asked quietly, and after a long moment, Kai simply answered yes. And in that instant he understood. This was no longer only about revenge, or even only about the truth. This was a war now. They couldn't return to the guild. It was far too dangerous. So Rena arranged a hidden warehouse on the outskirts instead. Aerith reinforced the old protective seals through the entire night, leaving nothing visible from the outside. Anna barely spoke at all that evening, and Ryan sat alone in a corner, staring at the floor as though he'd finally run out of the script he'd lived by his entire life. Gorm arrived late carrying food, silently setting it down without a single word. "Null is still alive," Rena reported grimly, "and so is the curator. The northern zone will likely be destroyed by tomorrow to erase every trace." "And what about us?" Doors asked. And Rena admitted they needed to decide exactly what to do with everything they'd just uncovered. The Iron Bloodline, the program, the Council's own hidden hand in all of it. This was no longer a small local matter. "And I won't let them bury it again," Kai said firmly, and Rena nodded, agreeing to bring the surviving archives straight to the city council itself. "We'll decide what happens with your mother and brother together," she added, looking directly at Kai. "I've already decided," Kai said quietly, looking over at Anna, at Ryan, and finally at Lyra. And in that moment he understood clearly. The next chapter of his life would no longer be about simply finding the truth. It would be about choosing, deliberately and completely, exactly who he was going to become. Doors broke the heavy silence first, reminding everyone that whatever came next, they would face it as a team, together. Mivie agreed without hesitation, insisting she hadn't survived that gorge just to walk away now. Aerith admitted quietly that he was still afraid, but that this mattered far more than his fear did. Gorm simply set down his old sword within easy reach and said nothing further needed saying. Anna finally looked up, studying her son properly for the first time since finding him again. "You carry his calm," she said softly. "But there's something in you the forest gave you that he never had." Ryan remained quiet for a long while before finally admitting he didn't know how to exist outside the walls he'd been raised inside. Kai told him plainly that nobody expected him to know immediately, only to choose one decision at a time. Lyra, wrapped in his borrowed cloak, finally fell into an exhausted, uneasy sleep on the warehouse floor. Kai sat beside her a long while, remembering exactly how it had felt the first time the spirits had offered him nothing but patience. Rena spread the surviving documents carefully across the table, sorting confirmed names from mere suspicions. "This isn't 10 agents anymore," Doors said grimly, studying the growing list. "It's dozens, scattered across every level of power. They grew this large because no one ever thought to dig into an old story," Rena said. "And now that story refuses to stay buried. Tomorrow's delegation gives us one real opportunity," she explained, "exposing part of the network while the whole city is watching. If we drag one piece of this into the light," Doors warned, "the rest of the network will scatter immediately." "Then let them scatter," Kai said calmly. "Scattered enemies are far easier to track than hidden ones." Gorm allowed himself the faintest hint of a smile, telling Kai he sounded exactly like his father used to. Rena studied Kai for a long moment before finally admitting she genuinely believed they could actually win this. "Believing and winning aren't the same thing," Kai said quietly, "but I intend to try regardless." Outside, the first hint of dawn was already creeping over the warehouse rooftops, painting the sky a pale, uncertain gray. Kai stepped outside alone for a moment, needing quiet before whatever the coming days would demand of him. He pressed his palm flat against the cold stone wall and thought of the forest, impossibly far away now, yet somehow still close. 20 years of silence had finally broken open into more truth than he'd ever expected to find. In a single week, a mother alive but complicit, a brother raised as a weapon, A stolen girl meant only to be a test subject. And somewhere out there, a council that had commissioned all of it, hiding comfortably behind official seals and polite committees. Moss had once told him that anger should be used as fuel, never as the driver. And Kai repeated those words to himself now like a promise. Behind him, the warehouse door creaked open, and Doors stepped out to stand quietly at his side. "You don't have to carry all of this alone," Doors said simply. And Kai admitted quietly that he was starting to understand that. In the forest there had only ever been him and the spirits, but out here, apparently, there could be more than that. "We move on Null's remaining network first," Doors said. "Then we deal with the council once the delegation arrives." Kai agreed, adding that Null himself was no longer the true target. He was only ever the door to something much larger. "The curator is the real danger," Eric said, joining them. "Whoever built that program clearly answers to someone even higher up." Mivier pointed out that the masked figure had never once shown fear, not even facing four armed adventurers at once. "That means it, or he is backup we haven't even seen yet," Doors said grimly. Anna finally emerged from the warehouse, steadier now, insisting she wanted to help however she still could. "You don't owe us anything," Kai told her gently, and Anna shook her head, insisting this fight had always belonged to her too. "I know things about that facility no map could ever show you," she said. "Patrol rotations, weak points, hidden staff." Rena welcomed the offer immediately, admitting that first-hand knowledge like that could save every single one of their lives. Rian finally stepped outside as well, quiet, uncertain, asking simply what he was supposed to do now. "Whatever you choose," Kai told him honestly, "but choose it yourself this time. Not because someone built you to." Rian was silent for a long moment before admitting he didn't actually know how to make a choice. That wasn't given to him. "Then start small," Kai said. "Decide what you want for breakfast, and work your way up from there." For the first time since the Northern Zone, something close to a real, genuine laugh escaped from Rian. Lyra woke slowly that morning, disoriented, until she remembered exactly where she was and who had carried her out. She asked cautiously if she was safe now, and Kai told her honestly that she was safer than she'd ever been, though the danger wasn't entirely gone yet. "What am I?" she asked quietly, and Kai admitted he didn't fully know either, but that it no longer mattered what they'd built her to be. "You get to decide the rest yourself," he told her, exactly the way I had to decide mine. The delegation arrived precisely on schedule, flags and polished armor lining the main street in a show of careful, deliberate order. Rena moved quickly through official channels, requesting an emergency audience with the visiting council representative. She laid out the surviving evidence piece by piece, named states. The sealed record confirming Anna's imprisonment for 10 full years. The representative's composed expression cracked slightly reading through the papers, clearly recognizing several of the listed names himself. "This implicates members sitting on the council right now," he admitted quietly. And Rena told him that was exactly the point. Doors and Mivier moved through the crowd, quietly identifying Null's remaining agents as the delegation's guards began making arrest. Sev, already cooperating under Rena's watch, confirmed 3 more names on the spot, buying himself real leniency at last. Eric's legal drafting from days earlier turned out to be sharp enough to formally reopen Rashir's 20-year-old case within hours. Gorm stood quietly at the edge of it all, finally allowing himself to look genuinely proud rather than simply grim. Null himself was found within the day, quietly attempting to flee through one of his own warehouses. He didn't resist when Doors and Mivier cornered him, admitting flatly that he'd known this day would come eventually. "You just didn't expect it to be his son who brought it," Doors said, and Null offered no argument against that at all. The curator, however, had vanished completely, leaving no trace behind in the ruins of the northern facility. That worried Kai more than Null's capture ever could. A masked shadow with no fear was still out there somewhere. Rena warned him plainly that catching Null was only the first true step. The deeper network above him remained untouched. The council representative promised a full investigation, though Rena made it clear she trusted promises far less than proof. "We keep our own copies of everything," she told Kai privately, "in case they try to bury this all over again." Kai agreed completely, understanding now exactly how easily the truth could disappear if no one stood guard over it. That evening, the warehouse felt different, lighter somehow, despite everything still left unresolved. Anna sat with Rion for the first time without chains between them, quietly beginning to rebuild 20 lost years one careful sentence at a time. Lyra sat nearby, listening, slowly beginning to understand what an actual family conversation even sounded like. Kai stood near the door, watching all of it, feeling something unfamiliar settle gently into place inside his chest. Doors approached and asked quietly what came next for him personally. Now that his father's case was finally moving forward. I stay. Kai answered simply. There's still a curator out there, and a program that clearly reaches further than any of us have seen. Mivier pointed out that he'd only been in the city a matter of days and had already upended half of it. Completely. Kai admitted that hadn't exactly been the plan when he walked through the city gates. That first morning, Arid asked, half joking, half serious, whether the forest spirits had somehow known all of this would happen. Moss never claims to know the future, Kai answered honestly. Only that there's a reason for wherever the wind eventually sends you. Gorm raised what was left of his tea in a quiet, unspoken toast. The first genuinely peaceful moment he'd allowed himself in years. Rena arrived late that night with updated news. 3 council members had already been formally suspended pending investigation. It's a start, she admitted, though far from a full victory. This fight would clearly stretch well beyond a single city. Kai nodded, admitting he'd already come to expect exactly that. Anna finally asked him quietly what he planned to do about the guild rank, waiting for him back in the city. Kai smiled faintly, the first real smile in days, admitting he still had 2 more quests left before that official review. Somewhere between all of it, he realized, life had quietly continued moving forward alongside everything else. Rian asked hesitantly if he could possibly join the guild himself someday, once people stopped looking at him like a weapon. Kai told him honestly that people's opinions would take time to shift, but that the choice itself was entirely his to make. Lyra asked the same quiet question, wondering if there was any place at all in this world for someone built the way she'd been. There's a place for you here, Kai told her firmly, exactly the same way the forest once made room for someone it had never expected. The days that followed were quieter, though never entirely calm, rebuilding trust inside the guild while the investigation slowly unfolded. Sev's testimony helped uncover to more hidden agents, further narrowing the shrinking, cornered remains of Null's old network. Doors, Mivier, and Arid stayed close through all of it, no longer simply teammates but something closer to family. Rena quietly promoted Kai's official rank ahead of schedule, admitting the review had become somewhat unnecessary by that point. Gorm finally returned to occasional guild work himself, insisting he still remembered exactly how to swing a sword properly. Anna slowly regained her strength, offering intelligence from her years of captivity that helped dismantle to more hidden facilities. Rian struggled daily, but kept choosing, one small decision after another, exactly as Kai had told him to. Lyra began to smile occasionally, small and rare, but genuine, something none of them had seen from her at first. The curator remained missing, a quiet unresolved shadow hanging over every small victory they managed to win. Kai never forgot that, keeping one careful ear turned toward the northern horizon even during the calmer moments. Some nights he still stood on rooftops, listening for wind that didn't belong to the city, and sometimes, faintly, he found it. I hear you, Moss, he would whisper into the dark, and something in him always settled a little more afterward. The forest had raised him for exactly this, he understood now, not for a single fight, but for a much longer war. And for the first time in his entire life, Kai finally understood exactly why the spirits had chosen to let him go. Not to send him away from his home, but to send him toward the one thing his home could never fully give him, people. People who could be cruel and dishonest and complicated in ways no forest predator ever was, but also people who could stand beside you in a burning building, or in a collapsing underground tunnel, without a single moment's hesitation. That, Kai realized, was worth every single risk this new life had already demanded of him. The council's investigation dragged on slowly, exactly as Rena had warned it would from the very beginning. But piece by piece, name by name, the network Null had spent 20 years building continued crumbling apart. Kai took on smaller quests in the meantime, refusing to let the larger war consume every single part of his new life. Each mission taught him something new about the strange, complicated rhythm of human society he'd only just begun to understand. Doors often walked beside him on these smaller jobs, quietly making sure Kai never drifted too far from the people now around him. Mivier kept close to Lyra especially, teaching her small, ordinary things. How to hold a spoon properly, how to laugh without flinching afterward. Eric continued documenting everything obsessively, insisting history needed an accurate record this time, not another convenient cover story. Rena watched all of it unfold with something like quiet, cautious pride, admitting she hadn't expected any of them to hold together this well. Gorm, for the first time in years, stopped reaching for his mug entirely most evenings, choosing tea and company instead. Anna slowly built a fragile, careful peace with her surviving son, understanding some wounds would need far more than words to heal. Rian remained distant at times but never disappeared, always returning eventually to sit near the others without being asked. Kai watched his family reassemble itself slowly, imperfectly, nothing like the forest, but no less real for that. And somewhere far beyond the city walls, the trees of the silent forest still remembered every single moment of it. The forest always remembered that it never changed, only now. It had something new worth remembering. Word eventually reached them that the curator had resurfaced far to the north, overseeing a second hidden facility no one had known existed. Kai's stomach turned cold at the news. Understanding immediately that this fight was nowhere near finished, Rena called the group together once more, spreading a new, wider map across the same worn table. If there's a second facility, she said grimly, there could easily be a third, a fourth. We've barely scratched the surface. Doors asked plainly if they were prepared to take this fight beyond the city entirely, and no one hesitated before answering yes. Anna offered to come this time, insisting her years of captivity gave her insight none of the rest of them could match. Kai worried openly for her safety, and Anna simply reminded him she had already survived worse than anything waiting ahead. Rion volunteered as well, quietly insisting he needed to see exactly what had been done to people like him, and finally end it. Lyra asked if she could help too, and Kai gently told her that healing herself first was help enough for now. The council representative, true to his earlier promise, authorized limited official support for their coming expedition north. It wasn't trust exactly, Rena admitted, but it was progress. And progress was worth more than empty promises right now. Gorm insisted on joining as well, ignoring every protest about his age with the same stubbornness Kai had come to expect from him. You buried my friend's silence for 20 years, Gorm said simply. I intend to see this through until the very end. Aerith spent the following days preparing detailed protective wards, determined not to be caught unprepared a second time. Mivier sharpened every blade she owned twice over, admitting Nerva's hands worked best when they had something familiar to hold. Doors quietly reviewed battle formations late into the night, refusing to let a second underground ambush catch them off guard again. Kai spent his final evening before departure sitting alone with the frozen bracelet on his wrist, remembering exactly where it had come from. He thought of the water spirit's parting words, that he looked like someone who had already seen many quiet, dangerous things. He understood those words far more deeply now than he had the day he'd first heard them. The morning they left, the entire guild turned out to see them off, a stark contrast to the laughter that had greeted Kai on his very first day. Rena stayed behind this time, managing the fragile peace within the city while the others ventured further north. The road north grew colder and rockier with every passing mile, the terrain shifting from farmland into something far harsher. Anna guided them expertly through terrain she'd only ever seen through narrow, barred windows for a decade. They found the second facility exactly where she predicted, buried deep beneath an abandoned mining outpost. This one was smaller than the first, but somehow felt colder, quieter, more deliberately hidden from the world. The curator was waiting for them almost as though he'd expected their arrival. From the very beginning. You keep coming back, Kai Iron, the curator said flatly. Persistence like yours is rare, and genuinely inconvenient for us. Kai answered simply that inconvenience was exactly what he intended to keep being, for as long as it took. The battle that followed was harder than the first, the curator himself finally stepping directly into the fight. He moved with a chilling, mechanical precision, as though every single motion had been calculated far in advance. Rion fought alongside his brother for the very first time by genuine choice, no longer bound by anyone else's programming. Together they found a rhythm neither could have managed completely alone, one relentless, the other precise. Anna guided the group safely past several deadly traps she remembered clearly, from her years trapped inside similar facilities. Doors and Mivier cleared the outer guards swiftly, leaving Kai and Rion free to focus entirely on the curator himself. Aerith's light finally found the one weakness hidden beneath the curator's mask, a single true point of ordinary vulnerability. With that opening exposed, Kai and Rion struck together, finally forcing the curator to genuinely retreat for the very first time. He vanished into the dark exactly the way Walt once had, leaving behind only unanswered questions and a badly damaged facility. Inside, they found more records, more names, and disturbing confirmation that the original program had spread far beyond just their own family. Other children, other bloodlines, had been taken over the years for entirely different specialized purposes. This is bigger than the Iron family ever was, Aerith admitted grimly, studying the sprawling records they recovered. Anna wept quietly reading through some of the names, recognizing families she remembered vanishing without any explanation over the years. We free who we can, Kai said firmly, and expose everything else to people who can no longer simply look away. They spent days dismantling what remained of the facility, freeing several captives still trapped inside its deepest chambers. Word of the discovery spread quickly once they returned. further destabilizing whatever remained of Null's shattered network. The council representative, faced with undeniable proof now, finally launched a full formal investigation into the original program itself. Rena welcomed them home with visible relief, admitting she genuinely feared she might never see some of them again. The guild hall felt different now, quieter, more respectful. When Kai walked back through its doors this time, no one laughed at his wolfhood anymore, not because it had changed, but because everyone finally understood exactly who wore it. Anna settled slowly into a quiet home near the guild, finally free after 10 long years to simply exist without fear. Rian formally joined the guild not long after, starting at the very bottom exactly like everyone else, exactly the way he wanted it. Lyra began attending healing lessons under a kind guild physician, slowly discovering interest entirely her own for the very first time. Gorm returned permanently to active adventuring, insisting retirement had clearly been a mistake all along. Doors, Mivier, and Eret remained Kai's closest companions, the four of them taking on increasingly difficult missions together. The Shadow Guild's influence didn't vanish overnight, but it shrank steadily, piece by piece, name by exposed name. Kai understood this war would likely stretch on for years, quietly, patiently, the same way the forest had once taught him patience. But he no longer faced it alone, and that single fact changed everything about how heavy the fight actually felt. Some evenings he still climbed to rooftops, listening for wind that didn't belong to any city street, and sometimes, faintly, impossibly far away, he still heard it answer him back. "I found my place, Moss," he would whisper quietly into the dark, "exactly like you said I would." The forest never answered in words, it never needed to, its silence had always spoken clearly enough. Kai understood now that home wasn't a single place at all. It was simply wherever the people who mattered stood beside you. The forest had given him strength, patience, and everything his body would ever need to survive. But the city, with all its noise and chaos and complicated, flawed people, had finally given him something the forest never could. A reason beyond mere survival. A purpose built entirely around protecting people rather than simply outlasting danger. Months passed, and the investigation into the wider program slowly widened into something the entire council could no longer ignore. More facilities were found, more captives freed, more names finally added to a growing, undeniable public record. No remained imprisoned, quietly cooperating in exchange for a lighter sentence, providing information piece by careful piece. The curator was never fully caught, but his reach shrank dramatically once his hidden network of facilities collapsed one by one. Kai suspected he would resurface again eventually, somewhere, patient the way only something artificially built could ever truly be. But for now, the immediate danger had passed, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Kai allowed himself to simply rest. He sat one quiet evening with his mother, his brother, and Lyra, sharing a simple meal exactly the way ordinary families did. Anna looked around the table and admitted quietly that this was more than she'd ever dared hope for. During her years locked away, Rian, still awkward but steadily improving, made a small joke that actually landed, earning genuine laughter from everyone at the table. Lyra smiled easily now, far more often than she once had, slowly shedding the caged stillness she'd carried for so long. Kai looked around at all of them and finally understood exactly what Moss had meant about finding a true structure to belong to. This was his structure now, not spirits, not trees, but people who had chosen, deliberately, to stay. Doors stopped by later that evening, simply to check in. Admitting the guild already felt strange without Kai wandering its halls daily. Rena sent word that Kai's official rank review had finally been completed, confirming what everyone already knew was true. He was no longer simply an F-rank forest outsider. He was recognized now among the very finest adventurers in the entire guild. Kai accepted the news calmly, admitting the rank itself mattered far less to him than everything he'd actually gained. Along the way, Gorm raised a proper toast that night, finally, without a trace of bitterness in his voice for the very first time in years. To Rashir, he said simply, raising his cup, who would be proud beyond words of exactly who his son became. Anna raised her own cup quietly, adding softly that she was proud of both her sons, in very different, equally hard-won ways. Kai looked at Rian as the toast settled, and for the first time, his brother actually smiled back without hesitation. The road ahead remained long, the Shadow Guild far from fully destroyed, and the program's full reach still not completely understood. But Kai no longer feared that uncertainty the way he once might have. On his very first day in the city, he had learned that the world outside the forest was messier, crueler, and far more complicated than anything Moss had ever prepared him for. But it was also warmer in ways the quiet forest, for all its wisdom, had simply never been able to offer him. He thought often of that very first night walking down the hill toward the city, uncertain, alone. and completely unaware of what waited below. If he could speak to that version of himself now, he wasn't entirely sure what he would even say. Perhaps only that the fear was worth pushing through, that the answers waiting on the other side were worth every single risk. The forest had shaped him into someone capable of surviving almost anything the world could throw at him. But it was the people he'd found afterward who had finally given him a genuine reason to keep standing. And that, more than any lesson the spirits had ever taught him, felt like the truest kind of strength there was. Kai closed his eyes that night surrounded by the people he now called family. And for the first time in 20 years, he slept without listening for danger. Tomorrow would bring new quests, new dangers, and undoubtedly new pieces of a much larger truth still waiting to be uncovered. But for tonight, the fight could finally rest, and so, at long last, could he. In the months that followed, the city slowly began to change, quietly, steadily, the way a forest changes after a long, hard winter. The council, forced into transparency by undeniable evidence, began genuine reforms no one had believed possible only a year earlier. Guilds across all 3 cities tightened their own internal reviews, wary now of exactly the kind of infiltration Null had built for decades. Rena became something of a quiet legend herself, the guild master who had helped bring down a network hiding in plain sight for 20 years. She never sought that recognition, insisting the real credit belonged to a stubborn forest outsider who simply refused to stop asking questions. Kai brushed off praise whenever it came his way, insisting he had simply done what his father had started long before he was even born. Rashir's name was formally cleared at last, restored with full honors in official council records after 2 decades of deliberate silence. A small memorial was placed near the guild archives, simple and unadorned, exactly the way Kai suspected his father would have preferred it. Anna visited it often, sometimes alone, sometimes with Kai beside her, saying little, needing to say little at all. Rian visited less often at first, still working through feelings that had no simple name. But he always eventually came. Lyra asked one day if she could visit too, admitting she felt somehow connected to a man she'd never even met. Kai told her she was welcome there anytime she wanted. Family wasn't only measured by blood. Not anymore, not for any of them. Doors, Mivier, and Eret remained a constant fixture in Kai's daily life. Their bond forged in fire long before it settled into easy friendship. They took on a rank of team designation officially not long after. One of the youngest fully certified teams the guild had ever recorded. Word of the Far Strays tracker's son spread well beyond the city eventually, drawing curiosity from adventurers in neighboring regions. Kai found the attention uncomfortable at first, uses to silence rather than reputation. But he slowly grew to accept it. It wasn't about fame, he reminded himself often. It was simply proof that the truth, once spoken, was difficult to bury again. The Shadow Guild's remaining branches scattered further with every passing month, weakened but never fully eliminated. Kai understood that some fights don't end cleanly. They simply shrink slowly until they're manageable instead of overwhelming. He made peace with that truth the same way he'd once made peace with the forest's own patient, unhurried nature. Some victories arrive all at once, dramatic and immediate, and some arrive quietly, one recovered name at a time. He learned to value both kinds equally, understanding that persistence mattered more than speed in a fight this large. On quiet evenings, Kai still returned occasionally to the edge of the city, staring toward the distant, unseen tree line. He never returned to the forest permanently, though Moss had always said he could visit, and visiting was exactly what he intended. When he finally did make that journey months later, the forest welcomed him exactly as it always had, alive, watching, remembering. Moss appeared almost immediately, taking the form of the old man Kai had rarely seen, reserved only for important moments. "You've changed," Moss observed simply, and Kai admitted that he had, more than he ever could have imagined that first day leaving. "Was it worth it?" Moss asked, though his tone made clear he already suspected the answer. "Every single difficult moment of it," Kai answered honestly, and Moss nodded slowly, satisfied completely with that answer. The other spirits greeted him too, the wind knocking him briefly off balance exactly the way it always used to. The stone spirit rested a heavy hand on his shoulder once more, silent, but somehow warmer than Kai remembered. The water spirit examined the bracelet still frozen around his wrist, quietly pleased to see it hadn't been lost or broken. Kai told them everything that had happened, his mother, his brother, Lyra and Null, the curator. The long fight still far from finished. Moss listened without interruption, the way he always had, absorbing every word with the patience only centuries could provide. "You found your structure," Moss said finally, echoing his own long-ago words back at him with quiet satisfaction. "I did," Kai admitted, "though it looks nothing like I expected it to when you first told me to look for one." Structures rarely look the way anyone expects, Moss said simply. That's usually a sign they're the right ones. Kai stayed 3 full days in the forest, sleeping beside the same fire he'd grown up beside, breathing air that still felt like home. When it came time to leave again, the farewell felt entirely different from the first, lighter, calmer, free of that old uncertainty. This isn't goodbye anymore, Kai said, and Moss agreed completely. It never really was, not truly. Not for either of them. He returned to the city renewed, ready for whatever the next stage of the fight against the Shadow Guild's remnants required of him. The team took on increasingly complex missions over the following months, each one chipping away steadily at what remained of Null's old empire. Ryung grew more confident with every mission, no longer questioning every single choice before making it. Lyra completed her healing training, eventually becoming skilled enough to treat serious battlefield injuries herself. Anna took on an advisory role within the guild, her intimate knowledge of the enemy's methods proving invaluable again and again. Rena continued expanding reforms across the guild system, determined that infiltration on the scale could never happen again unnoticed. Gorm remained active far longer than anyone expected, insisting old dogs simply needed the right reason to keep fighting. Doors eventually took on students of his own, passing down lessons he learned the hard way over many dangerous years. Mivier became known across the region for knife work unmatched by nearly anyone, her reputation growing entirely on its own merit. Eret finally published his detailed records of everything they'd uncovered, ensuring the true history could never again be quietly erased. Kai read every page of it once it was finished, surprised by how much of his own story had become simply part of a larger, shared record. He didn't mind that at all, understanding now that some truths only mattered once other people carried them forward too. The curator resurfaced only twice more over the following year, each time retreating the moment Kai and Ryan appeared together. Whatever remained of the original program grew smaller and more cautious with each encounter, exactly as they'd hoped it would. Kai suspected it would take years, perhaps longer, to fully dismantle everything hidden beneath 20 years of careful secrecy. But for the first time since walking out of that forest, he no longer felt like he was fighting that battle entirely alone. He had a mother rebuilding a life stolen from her, a brother learning to choose freely for the very first time. He had a girl once meant only to be an experiment, now becoming someone entirely of her own making. He had friends who had bled beside him more than once, and a guild master who had trusted him from his very first strange, chaotic day. And somewhere far behind him, a forest that remembered every single step of the journey that had brought him here. Kai understood now that the hook of his whole story had never really been about revenge at all. It had always been about a boy learning exactly who he was, piece by painful piece, until the picture finally made sense. The wolf hood he still wore stopped drawing laughter a long time ago. Now it simply drew quiet, familiar respect. People in the guild still occasionally called him the Forest One, but the word no longer carried a single trace of mockery. It had become something closer to a title, one Kai found he didn't mind carrying at all. On the anniversary of his arrival in the city, the whole team gathered quietly to mark exactly how far they'd all come together. Doors raised a toast, calling it the day the guild finally stopped underestimating strangers in strange hats. Everyone laughed, Kai included. The memory of that first humiliating evening finally softened by everything that came after. Rena admitted she'd nearly refused his outrageous first request that very first day, and was endlessly grateful now that she hadn't. Anna told him quietly, later that evening, how proud his father would have been watching the man he'd finally become. Kai simply nodded, unable to find words large enough for exactly how much that meant to hear out loud. Rian raised his own cup that night for the first time, calling Kai the brother he never expected but was grateful to have found. Lyra added quietly that she'd never truly had a family before this one, and Kai told her she absolutely did now. Gorm simply smiled, content, finally at peace with the promise he kept for 20 long, difficult years. As the evening wound down, Kai stepped outside alone once more, looking up at a sky full of unfamiliar city stars. He thought of the forest of moss, of every hard lesson that had shaped him long before he ever knew why. And he thought of everyone waiting just behind him now, the family he'd built entirely on his own, piece by hard-won piece, somewhere far away. When moved through trees that had watched over him since the very night he was born, it reached him even here, faint but unmistakable, exactly the way it always had. "I hear you, Moss," he said quietly into the night sky, and for once, that was truly all he needed to say. The war against the shadows would continue, slowly, patiently, for as long as it needed to. But Kai no longer measured his life only by that fight. He measured it by everyone standing beside him through it. The boy the forest once found broken and crying beside a river had become something entirely his own making. Not simply a weapon, not simply a tracker's son, not simply a vessel built by 20 years of patient spirits. Something more complete than any single one of those pieces alone had ever been. A brother, a son, a friend, a protector, and finally, unmistakably, exactly who he had chosen to become. The city that had once laughed at his wolfhood now called him one of its own, and Kai found he no longer minded either title. Forest boy or guild legend, both were true, and both, he realized, had always belonged to the exact same person. Years from now, adventurers still swapping stories in that same noisy guild hall would tell newcomers about the night a savage from the woods dropped a troll's skull on the floor. They would tell it as a legend eventually, exaggerated with every retelling. The way all good stories eventually become. But Kai knew the real truth behind it, simpler and far more human than any legend could ever capture. It was never about the skull, or the gold, or even the rank he eventually earned. It was about a boy raised by silence finally learning how to be heard, and choosing, every single day after, to keep being heard. The forest gave him strength enough to survive nearly anything the world could throw at him. But it was the people he found afterward who taught him exactly what that strength was actually for. 20 years of silence had finally been answered, piece by painful piece, truth by hard-won truth. And in the end, it wasn't vengeance that defined him. It was everyone he chose to stand beside once the truth came out. A mother rebuilding her life, a brother learning to live freely, a girl discovering who she truly was beneath everything done to her, a guild that once mocked him now proud to call him one of their finest, and a forest, far away, but never truly distant, that would remember every single moment of it, exactly the way it always had. Kai walked back inside that night to rejoin the people who had become his family in every way. That mattered. Whatever waited ahead, monsters, shadows, or truth still buried, he would face it exactly the way he'd faced everything since that very first day. Not alone, not afraid, but fully, completely himself. Forest and city both woven into the very same person. And that, more than any victory or any rank or any name finally cleared, was the truest ending his story could ever have earned.